And we're moving on to the last of our presentations today. And I'll be introducing the illustrious Michael Isensee from Washington State Department of Ag, here to give you some manure updates.
Thanks. And first, before I get started, I'm actually going to introduce our newest staff person who joined us just after Thanksgiving. This is Dan Sulak. I'm going to hand the mic over to him to let him say a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Michael. So as Michael said, I've just been here a couple months. Really been enjoying it so far. Had kind of a winding path to get here. Originally I'm from Colorado, so grew up in a ranching community there, a lot of beef ranching and some wheat farming as well. I worked for a season on a dairy farm in New Zealand. I've also done some orchard work, so that's kind of my agricultural background. And then I've done some research in nutrient cycling. And the past few years I've spent doing salmon recovery and monitoring in Eastern Washington. So that's kind of my water quality background. So here I'm kind of tying it together with this new position. A lot of you will probably see me out doing some water sampling. That's kind of what I'm focused on at the moment in the wet season here. And eventually I think I'll be transitioning and doing some of the dairy inspections as well. So I'll probably meet some of you on your farms as well. So yeah, it's been great getting to know the area and seeing what everybody's doing to protect the water quality in the area. And I'm excited to be here. So thanks.
Great. Yeah, so as Dan said, he's our new primary water quality sampler, so he's out in the field a lot collecting samples throughout these northwest Washington counties, Snohomish, Whatcom, and Skagit. And eventually, like his predecessors, he'll start doing inspections too, possibly up here, but more likely either in Snohomish or Skagit. But I'll be bringing him along to some of your farms here in coming months. Let him see the range of practices that are out on the ground. And so I am Mike Isensee. I'm with the State Department of Agriculture in the Dairy Nutrient Management Program. And I know you've all been waiting all day to see if I have pictures of you this year, right? That's why everyone's still here. Now, I have pictures showing through the year. This first is a map of Whatcom. It's our nutrient tracker. I've talked about it before, that through the year we are mapping what we observe out on the landscape in terms of both dairy nutrient applications of liquid or solid manure, but also pasture fields and non-dairy livestock sites. And so it's just a way of us tracking what we're seeing. We use general risk rating, low, medium, or high on the day that we observe this, which doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening in the future, and I'll talk about that in my presentation with some of the pictures. So the one slide year in review in terms of weather, which you guys all just lived through, you know, it was a wet winter into spring, but most of that happened in January, and that was a great way to, I'd say, start the year, because for application season we weren't super challenged in terms of wet weather through the spring. For the 5th year running, we had a dry summer. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to Nicole in terms of mentioning that, but that's certainly being a challenge for some nutrient management, especially on non-irrigated ground. That's not what I'm talking about today, so I won't go there. Then in the fall, we were also above average, but it was pretty nicely spread with some late summer, early fall rains. But our wet season didn't really start till the end of October 26th, when we got 2 inches of rain. And so even though October was really close to average, most of it was quite dry. And we ended the year with a wet November, and so not too far over average compared to recent years, but that sort of informs where we were in terms of what I'm showing with pictures. I'm trying to be pretty equal opportunity this year. I have beef, cow, dairy cow, heifer, and horse pictures. We flew 3 times during the year. This was the first one in March. This is a site that has both horses and beef cows, and obviously some direct water connections for those livestock, so not ideal. I will say that after flying and seeing this, I did one sampling downstream and was not elevated, and I have a number of those where we sampled before we passed this information on to the regulatory agency. In this case, that would have been Department of Ecology, and to see, like, is this a problem in terms of the water quality at that time, and it wasn't. So it's an interesting conundrum, because I'm pretty sure that this site is a problem at times. Here's beef cow site. It's pretty miserable. Lots of bad practices here. You don't want your site to look anything like this. Overtopping Lagoon, our first dairy site. Ideally, though, with this lagoon, it's overtopping. Let's see here if I can do this. It's overtopping here in this corner and running out into the field. At the time that we observed this, you can't see it too well, but on the upper part of the field, the operator's well aware of this. He is out applying to bring that level down. He had done some positive practices on that field. He had disked around the edge before applying. The weather gods were in general with him. I didn't document a discharge, even though we got some rain in the next couple of days, but then we had over a week of dry weather, and that left him in a pretty good position. But there were some challenges at this site that led to being full up. This wasn't a winter to be full up at early March. So if you are full up, you should be talking to a planner and figuring out what's going on. Really poor setbacks for this time of year. No documented discharge, but that was as much because I didn't have an upstream sample from this site. The water quality wasn't great downstream. It was over the water quality standard, but not very high in the days following. A solid separation pad. If you have runoff coming from your separated solids and they aren't contained, that's a problem. And you should fix it immediately, and you should be working with a planner on a long-term fix. To the degree possible, a number of you have covered solids, and to the degree you can get cost share to do that, I think it's a great practice. It gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you're managing your solids in the future. And my next series of slides here, I think, as we go through, I'm seeing solids in part because I see people doing better and better job with their liquid nutrient applications. I'm seeing more and more problems with solids. Part of that is that you can see them for a lot longer out in the landscape. And part of that is that they last a lot longer out in the landscape. But before we get there, here's a small horse site. Again, a direct access to surface water, though they do, they have a bridge over this swale, but there's no fence along the swale, so they're partway there. We just need to get them the rest of the way there. This is end of May. If you have a grass field, this was a week after an application. It was a non-dairy field, but if you have an application that looks like this, you applied too much. I ended up on this one because it came in as an odor complaint, and it was, which I got a number of this year. This one made sense. It was still wet a week after application on the surface. We did get some early or late summer rains, I guess, and so some fields get saturated really fast. And already, if they're saturated, then it was time to get those cows off. Late in this picture, because we're going chronologically, I had fields that I didn't see saturated till December. So you got to know your field, but when we switch it in this time frame, late summer into fall, you need to take a lot of care where you have cows out, if you still have cows out in fields, because they're leaving behind their nutrients. And when we enter the fall, what I'm seeing, hypothesizing, I guess, is that your nutrients are going to persist out there on the surface for an extended period as we lose that sunlight and it gets cooler. So we get a lot longer runoff potential. So the rest of the pictures mostly feature in this time immediately after October 30th. We flew October 30th. It rained about 2 inches on the 28th, which was really the beginning of the wet season. You can see the river had risen, and so here at the beginning of the flight, you can really see that sediment load from the river being pushed out into Portage Bay. It was really obvious from the air that day as we took off, and you could see that. So in that time frame, you can see that rain. This is the river at Ferndale, the USGS gauge. You can see that rapid river rise after being way under the average. The average are the yellow triangles across here. Rise rapidly and then stay above average with the onset of those rains. Then in the days right following, November 2nd, we had a lot of rain. The river didn't flood at Ferndale, though it reached just at flood stage up at Highway 542, and I know a lot of places saw floodwaters on the 2nd. So here's one of those solid applications we saw on the 30th. Here's a picture looking across at that field on November 2nd. There's already floodwaters in the foreground, but I heard from another producer that the levee along the river throughout this whole area later that day sheet flooded over, like it overtopped the levee for about a half mile. So I'm pretty confident that we had runoff from those solids. Here's another picture of solids placed right close on bare ground. That was all underwater on November 2nd. Not what you want. Beef cows out on a saturated pasture, so that is saturated with that 2 inches of rain. Elevated counts downstream on November 2nd from there. More solids, those aren't in the floodplain, but what I would consider a high-risk area in terms of going on to corn ground. There's, just from the picture to my eye, you see the standing water over here, and you can see it already in the picture that you have some sort of swale in that field, so a risky kind of place. Solids applied, maybe not bad over here, but already when we were flying, this was underwater, and here's a picture from the road with runoff coming from where those solids are. We didn't document a discharge, though it was elevated in the ditch because the ditch was elevated from bad pasture management upstream of this already. So you had multiple sources going into the ditch here. More solids placed right close to that ditch that I outlined in red. That's a site that isn't likely to run off really soon, but I just think solids placed out in the field when you're looking at them like this, end of October, they're going to be a problem later on. You've got to put your solids places that aren't going to run off. Or you got to get them incorporated. And I hope that we can see some, I don't know if edge of field, but I'd like to see looking at what are effective fall management of solids on the ground. Whether it is incorporation, whether it's that they just need to go in places that don't discharge. We did see a few applications going on still at the end of October. It was a high-risk time to be applying. This didn't end up, I didn't document a discharge off of this, but I'd be surprised if it didn't discharge. Here was, this is manure pit applications. So it was liquid slurry that had been put out through the late summer and fall. That field all flooded and discharged, and you can still see the heavy manure even after the floodwaters have come across that field. I put this picture, and this is from a roadway at that time frame, well, mid-October. It's very, I'd say a bucolic pasture scene until you look at it from the air. Those animals are in this pasture, which consists of a swale. On the 30th, it wasn't flowing. By November 1st, it was flowing. You can see the arrows up here showing this arrow pointing back up that swale. So 3 days later, it's flowing. Here's water quality results at the outfall from this area over the course of the next month. So that's the kind of duration of discharge we might be seeing from pasture management. Confounding this, we had nutrient applications upstream of that swale. So again, multiple discharge source potential. So what the sources were and how long any one source persisted is hard to say, but you can get extended periods of runoff coming off of sources. I didn't document an actual discharge that exceeded the water quality standard off those application fields, but that was as much a matter of timing as anything, I believe. This was put in my view, as a public service announcement. If your slab to a pasture heavy use area looks like this, you got to make sure that that's not going to go somewhere. In this case, we're looking at, here's a downspout. If you have broken downspout in that area, or if you're going into a perforated tile under there, or your tile drain that's conveying that is broken subsurface, you're going to have a problem. If you're going to eventually flow this way and into a roadside ditch, you have a problem. This is actually a site that we have a known discharge downstream, but we don't know where it's coming from. So is it coming from here? We're not sure, but eventually we'll figure it out. So here's one of those late season sites. Horses out in the field, late December. And it still looks really nice. This site hasn't generated runoff yet. It's not like that September 15 pasture that's already saturated with the first 2 inches of rain. This one's taken up, all the rain we've had so far and not run off. But by January 3rd, the horses in that picture were back here. By January 3rd, it is running off and you're getting elevated counts coming off that pasture. Here's another one. Pay attention to the yellow box. You can see the yellow box showing that barn in the next picture. So late season dairy heifers. This field's just showing that it's saturated. You can see standing water out there, but not running off at that point. And it's at a site that gets sampled. It was getting sampled regularly this fall. It wasn't elevated at all this fall in the ditches until it looked like this on January 3rd. That whole field pretty much is underwater for a long ways, and elevated bacteria levels. Not super high, 682 was the bacteria count, but you're looking at a lot of freshwater dilution for what manure's there to get to that count, and a lot of water's running off of that site, or through that site. Some parting thoughts and some kudos. We've heard already about some of the advanced technologies that folks are investing in and that public monies are going to. I'm keeping my fingers crossed because I think there's some great promise, and of course there'll be new challenges presented if those do succeed. But we have a lot of public money and a lot of effort going into upright tank storage. I think it's helping. That's not to say that I think that lagoons are a big problem. I'm really happy when I see sites that are able to keep their lagoons and get upright storage. More storage is a great deal for giving people flexibility. Uprights are a great deal in getting you more concentrated nutrients for, say, the spring when you want a good nutrient load on your grass or corn. And we have people also looking at doing projects. So this is a system working to treat runoff from the feed area that we've gotten elevated counts off of. They're working to try and figure out how do we resolve that. This is basically, I describe it as a above ground septic system for their runoff. They collect it all. They're sending it through a multi-layer of sand and soil before it exits. So it starts here, pumped up just about 5 feet, and then it infiltrates through this area. There's tiles that send it out here, and then it's flowing through an extended grassed area. And I don't know yet whether it's a solution for this place. They're working to figure that out. I'm really happy when I see folks that are trying to figure out how do we solve our problems. And it's one of the things that I think farmers in general, and I'm happy to have been working with you guys for the last nearly 8 years because there's a lot of you that are really into let's figure out how we solve our problems. Because you don't all have the same problems. It may show up as bacteria in the water or sediment or whatever, but there's different solutions for each site, and figuring it out is what it's all about. So thanks for doing that, and I'm happy to take questions.
So that the pipe running down the top of the blocks, is it trying to put the solution into kind of the middle of your upper,
So it's dropping it back,
in the middle, and
and then it flows back this way.
okay.
Yeah. And then this is designed so they can get a front end loader and scoop out the sediment that's deposited there.
So would it be more acidic silage runoff water, or?
It's some of all kinds of stuff. It's not clear why we've had really high bacteria counts out of it. It doesn't have it doesn't have a manure component unless you can count the tracking of equipment driving through a little bit of manured areas. But high bacteria counts, obviously, it's a problem, and it was that deserves some solutions. But they've stepped forward. This isn't a cost share project. This is folks spending their own money to figure it out.